Hello, CS 325, 525 students. Um, so last week I asked you to look at exercises number 2 at the end of chapter 1, and it was tough. And I knew that because I looked at them too. And I think having struggled with it a bit, and I've started to look at some of your answers, um, we will spend just a few minutes right now just looking at a few of these, and I have the author's thoughts on some of these questions and also some of my own. So um, just to give you a sense of what, how reasonable ways to approach these questions. And let me start with these questions were not very well specified for the most part. And that was deliberate on the author's part. The author was trying to get people to think about what it takes to make an agent model. And, mostly if you're going to be doing something, computerizing it, you need to nail down a lot, fairly specifically, so that you could program the computer's behavior. And as computer people, you know that. And of course, the problems that you will get in real life come from people who tend not to give them to you in completely well specified form. So, this is the kind of exercise that one would have to do if you're going to be building an agent model or any computer program. You're almost certainly starting with something that's not very well specified. And part of your job is to figure out as the expert how to refine things down so that you can make it computable. So in that spirit, and knowing that you were kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool, I'll be very generous. Um, but it's also worthwhile then to go revisit, take a look at some of these. I don't know, people pick different ones, um, and get a sense of, with a somewhat more expert eye, um, towards agent modeling, what would one do with these questions? So that's the purpose of this video. And we'll go over only a few of them, and I hope doing that will be enough to give you the idea. So let me start screen sharing. I typed these in um, so that we could look at them. So that should be showing the questions, and let me move some of these black boxes out of the way here so they aren't obscuring the okay. So why is this thing over here? Meeting chat, so on. Okay. All right. So if we're screen sharing, we should be looking at the problems. And let's start with number 1 over here. How closely should a farmer plant the trees in a fruit orchard? And I think your first question when looking at these um, things, these questions, your question should be, what the two questions are what are we trying to optimize here? What variables are we trying to model? And number 2 is, what are the agents? Okay. And then in the problem, he also points out, what are the variables? So what are the things that are playing the game? Think of this as a kind of game which is being played out. So what are the things that are moving around in the game? What are the things, how do they interact with each other, and what are the variables? And then, of course, what's the question that you're trying to answer? So, so for problem number A here, um, it's a little hard to think about because trees don't move. Whereas for the little programming exercise you had, mushrooms were being grazed and eaten, right? Um, so, and the next question is, what are we trying to optimize? And somehow you're going to be trying to optimize yield. You'll probably have to assume the author and the authors in their notes say you probably should start with the notion that there's going to be a fixed amount of land, and then you're going to have to assume somehow the trees are the objects, and you're going to have to make a lot of assumptions, and there are going to be variables that the implication is here that the amount of fruit that a tree produces, it will be affected in some way by the proximity of other trees. So maybe trees, shade each other or grab each other's nutrients or something like that. So your objects somehow will be the trees, and you're going to have to define what are the ways in which trees interact with each other. So they're not going to be moving as part of the problem here for agent-based simulation. So if the trees don't move and you can just specify with a few simple equations, if the trees are this far apart, then they will inhibit each other by 5% because of shading or whatever. And if they're somewhat closer, then they inhibit each other by 10%, like that. Then you don't need any agent modeling because there's no process that's happening over time. So if you could specify with a certain close density of trees, how much the trees affect each other and what their yield would be, then it's pretty simple. You don't need agent modeling. To make this agent modeling, the trees are going to have to be doing some time-dependent behavior. So you would assume that the trees are growing, and then each tree, they have some randomness in the terms of how much they grow, and then there's some randomness in how much they interfere with their fellow trees. And that's what you would have to do to turn this into an agent model. All right. And then the question you would still be answering would be, what would be the yield on the trees? Okay, so that's A. So B, we have a single person here who is putting money in 5 different investment funds. And again, so we have a time behavior here. We'll have to assume that each of the 5 investment funds is putting some different amount, time varying amount of interest or, return, or maybe the values are fluctuating up and down. And there's going to be an interaction in the sense that taking money out of the one fund, to go into another fund might be a kind of a time-dependent behavior also. If each of the funds is giving out a well predictable rate of interest and no money is moving around, you don't need an agent model. And then the authors say, the one agent here is the person. But I claim this could be an agent model if each of the investment funds were an agent, and the funds could be cannibalizing money from each other, and they would also have some time-dependent random behavior. So a road could have 1, 2, or 3 lanes in each direction. Again, what are we trying to optimize? And in a realistic, the authors point out that people do agent modeling on this. Some of the things that go into the question are, how much does it cost to build the road, in terms of if you have 3 lanes in each direction, you're grabbing up a whole lot more land, which will cost more for the land, but also costs more in terms of there's less land available for everybody, else for the rest of the town to use. But the prime idea behind the agent modeling would be to have each vehicles are agents. And so you'll have to make some assumptions about vehicular behavior. And that's what they really do. So you have an imagined piece of road. You have vehicles of, a couple different types of vehicles, trucks and cars and things. They have behaviors, things like their speed, things like how they change their speed when they get close to another vehicle, and, passing, when and how do they pass. And they actually will model the roads in this way. So the, what are we trying to optimize for the 1, 2, or 3 lanes? You'll have to start with some assumptions about what your traffic looks like in terms of what types of vehicles you have, how many of each, and the time, time-dependent behavior of new vehicles coming into the road, wanting to travel through here. And you might be trying to optimize, how close, the average speed is to the speed limit, how much they're interfering with each other and slowing down. Or you might be trying to optimize the number of vehicles per hour at maximum traffic. Okay, in which case, going slower than the maximum speed might turn out to be the optimum solution. You're getting more vehicles through per hour, but they're so crowded that they're traveling slower. So that question is one of the questions you need to start with. Looking at D, is it acceptable to allow a small legal harvest of whales? This one, the authors point out, is going to be really hard because you need to define acceptable. So they suggest this one is probably not going to be really an agent model thing. So anyway, that's the kind of thinking that goes through these problems. You could identify what you're trying to optimize, what the variables are there, and what what the behaviors are between the different agents. Number G is interesting because it's one that, again, that actually can be done with agent. It was this kind of problem was that banks and banks, the way banks work is you deposit your money in the bank and they take 80% of it or some percentage like that, and they invest that money. And of course, every dollar you put in the bank, people are eventually going to withdraw from the bank. So in order for the bank to operate, in order for it to pay its expenses, its investments pay off. So they're taking your money, they're investing part of it, and they're making money by investing your money, and that's what keeps them alive. But of course, when you go to the bank to withdraw some money, that better be there. So the government has requirements that you can only invest 80% of your money, some number like that, and you need to keep 20% in reserve. Okay, and so then there are assumptions behind that about what happens, how often people are on the average removing money from the bank. What makes this an agent model is when you start getting multiple customers and multiple banks. It becomes suddenly no longer amenable to a simple statistical calculation. And the thing is that when you start making the customers into agents, real life customers will withdraw their money when they sense danger. This is what's known as a panic. And this is what really happens. And this is the primary behavior that caused our government to start regulating banks the way they are currently regulated. And the notion is that when one bank fails, customers from the other banks immediately worry and start and grabbing, their deposits out, which might cause more banks to fail. Okay, and it cascades from there. So This is why we have FDIC, bank insurance, by the way, so that people are not worried that their bank might fail. If their banker failed, the money's insured, you'll get your money back. And this reduces the panic level. So in this situation, then customers would be agents and banks would be agents. And you would have, some for the customer agent, you'd have some behavior programmed in where, they're putting money into the banks at some rate, they're removing their money with withdrawals, again, some rate, which might be statistical. And the banks, you have to have some assumption about the rate of return that banks have on their investments. You might just assume that's constant. I don't know. And then you could just make a simulation where have several banks, customers pick a bank, they start depositing money, they start withdrawing money. Statistically, occasionally you're going to hit bottom and a bank fails. And then the behavior of all the other customers start to change. They start hitting on their banks a little harder. So that's the way that would work. Again, that could be a pretty good thing for an agent model. It's the kind of thing that it looks like plain statistics should work. But as soon as you get enough banks and enough customers, that would work. Okay. So that's the idea behind these. Okay. Again, some of this is my talking, but it's informed also by what the authors wrote. Okay. J, I thought was interesting because I didn't see what the agents were here. And the agents I think are supposed to, these are the two movies over here. Okay. And the agents I think are supposed to be customers that, making movie choices. I could not figure out how to model this guy at all. Whereas for, okay. So anyway, that's enough. I've talked enough. Anyway, I hope that gives you an idea of the kind of thinking that goes into this set of questions. There were no actual right answers. I'll be very generous when grading. The point was to wrestle with the problems and learn a little bit. And I hope this kind of after action discussion will help in that regard.